everyone. Everyone's least favorite panda here. So, if you can't tell, I have no idea what this video is. But all I know that Fridays and Mondays video will be better. I'm going to plan on trying to upload Valorant challenges for you guys. I have a really good challenge I want to try to do after I unlock every character. But I have no clue, and this is really just a filler video. And thank you guys, and let's get right into it. Then put his fingerprints on it. That's how I bet she did it.
In Aomori prison, beaten and tortured every night by prison guards, and now worse, prosecutors were seeking
I cannot
the
even
death
find
penalty.
it in my normal
In his
files.
Mind, it was time to go, but Aomori prison wasn't the easiest to escape. Regardless, Yoshie Shiratori had nothing to lose, and so at 5:30 a.m. he made his move. He knew there would be a 15-minute gap in the patrol time, as he had studied the guard's routine for months. And when the coast was clear, he pulled out a metal wire which he had smuggled in from the bathhouse and started to pick the lock. This was originally the metal support ring that was wrapped around the bathing buckets inmates used to wash themselves. His hands were stiff from the wintry cold, but after a few minutes of picking, he had success, and his cell door swung open. But he wasn't out of the woods yet, because there were more locked doors ahead. He knew he only had a few minutes left before the guards would return, and so he wasted no time attempting to pick his way through the remaining security doors. Now, fortunately for him, he was able to make it out of the facility, but the bad news was that he was only halfway to freedom. You see, he was still well within the search perimeter, which meant at any moment the alarm could go off and he'd still be caught. At 5:45 a.m., the guards returned, peering into his cell, and this is what they saw. Shiratori sound asleep in his futon bed. But of course, what they didn't realize was that they were looking at something else. A pile of loose floorboards underneath his duvet designed to trick them. It wasn't until the next morning that they finally discovered the truth and the alarm was sounded. But by then, Shiratori was long gone.
Done, guys.
Now, he had escaped, but if you've watched any of our previous videos, you'll know that things aren't always as they seem. In fact, for Yoshie Shiratori, aka the prison break magician, this was only the beginning. 3 days later, he was caught trying to steal supplies from a hospital, and just like that, he was back in the slammer. But this time, for his escape attempt, he was sentenced to life in prison. He would never be with his family again, his wife and his daughter.
Discord just
and all the months of
automatically
planning
open. I got
had led
text
to just
messages.
3 days on the hard concrete floor in the severe winter cold, and placed into solitary confinement for extended periods of time. Now, this was a specially made solitary confinement cell, which was very small and had a very high ceiling, with the walls covered with copper sheets so smooth that it was impossible to grip. In addition, there was almost no sunlight even in the daytime, with the only window light coming from a small sealed skylight high above. This was a room designed to keep escape artists from escaping. Left was his handcuffs. So how did he do it? Well, there were a few assumptions the guards made that did not apply to Shiratori. For one, handcuffs simply didn't work on him. Shiratori was actually a master of getting out of handcuffs, and in fact had several methods to choose from. Here, he decided to go with the familiar lock-picking method, but he really could have gone with any of them. He had thoroughly scoured his surroundings to find anything that could be of use in an escape, and just like in Aomori prison, he was able to uncover a loose bit of wire. Perhaps it was from one of the items Kobayashi brought him, but this wasn't clear. After freeing himself from the cuffs, he placed his palms and soles of his feet on the smooth copper sheets and started climbing the unclimbable wall. It turned out Shiratori was also an expert climber with an uncanny ability to scale like a lizard. Once he reached the skylight above, he noticed that, yes, the window was sealed, but the wooden framing around it was starting to rot. And so thereafter, night after night, when the guards weren't looking, he'd climb the copper walls and loosen the framing, bit by bit. Afterwards, he'd climb back down and place the handcuffs back on, as to not rouse suspicion. After a couple months, the window finally came loose, and from there, it was just about choosing the right day. He waited until a particular stormy night, so the guards wouldn't hear she took him severely, but he was denied his request. Instead, the judge sentenced him to the infamous Abashiri prison in Hokkaido, the northernmost prison in Japan. No man had ever escaped from this wintry hellhole of a prison. It was now 1943, and the cold was unbearable in Abashiri, as the temperature in the cells was below freezing point. Whenever inmates received their prison food, the miso soup and soy sauce would often freeze up. In this temperature, a handcuffed Shiratori was thrown into an open cell in summer clothing, and he immediately felt the paralyzing sting of cold air. Perhaps in a fit of desperation, he tried to force himself past the guards, but they were able to push him back and beat him down. An enraged and defiant Shiratori stood back up and vowed that he would escape from Abashiri prison, like he's always done, and that there was nothing they could do about it. In fact, he claimed there was little point even putting handcuffs on him, as he'd always find a way to break free. If not by lockpicking, then, well, this. He then proceeded to rip apart the chain of his handcuffs, to the horror of the guards. It turned out Shiratori had another special ability.
I see that. Oh, okay. Well, what I was going to say. It makes sense it would be able to break it, because metal does harden and becomes sort of like a glass sort of texture. Well, not glass, but it's really it's more breakable in cold weather than it is hot weather. But, yeah.
Aside from his outstanding climbing abilities, he also possessed incredible strength, almost superhuman strength. Back in Akita prison, he could have broken free of the cuffs the physical way if he didn't have to put them back on. Now, this was impressive, but it wasn't so smart to lay his cards on the table like that, as the guards were starting to build an escape profile on him. They knew he had lockpicking abilities, lizard-like climbing abilities, and now almost superhuman strength. And so they set out to devise the ultimate escape-proof cell, one that was sure to be Shiratori-proof. And they came up with this. The new cell had steel fixtures with a low chance.
Bad decision. That right there, I see. It could be wood. That right there, clear. No one's getting out of that. Easy to climb though. That should not be there, because that's a climbing wall, and you can easily climb on that. Also, that right there, he could hide right there at an angle, and it looks like that window can only see like this, so this is the box right here. I bet he get that wall. That looks like a 5x9, a piece of about the size of a little bit smaller than a laptop monitor. But I say you can only see him from right here to right here. And so that angle is so far to the side, or right there for even crying out loud. He could come in, beat the guard, get his crap, dress up like him, throw the guard in there. But to do this, what he would have to do most likely would to most not to say that, and get him right before he gets off, beat him up, change into his clothes, lock him up, gag him, put a pillow in his mouth or something, and then just shut up, do nothing. But then I suggest you instant leave. You'll find if he's driving a car, if he's taking the bus, you probably driving a car. Probably not. Yeah, probably driving a car. Get his keys, get his crap, leave. Do not say hi to anyone. Do not do anything but check out and leave. So it will not raise suspicion. I suggest you try to turn your face away from everyone that looks at you. But if they're staring at you, I suggest you try to turn your face try to cough into your elbow so they cannot see your face. And so what you would then have to do most likely, get his crap, get his car keys, leave. Leave. Just straight up leave. Bolt, try to go for the nearest I want to say the nearest highway. Go to the nearest highway. By then, most likely, by the time the other guard comes in, you'll be gone far gone. Far away. But
Yeah, far. Like, I mean, they'll probably not even be able to catch you. But they might border block the highway. They don't know you're going to the highway. I would probably try heading towards Tokyo. I would probably change your identity completely. Make new accounts for banking, do everything. Yeah. Let's keep on playing. That's my opinion. That's my opinion.
Smaller than his body, meaning there was no way he could physically fit through. He had specially made solid iron handcuffs that tied his hands
like a
behind his
5-minute
back,
rant.
and leg cuffs that made him barely able to stand. These cuffs weighed 20 kgs each and had no keyhole.
Oh my
which
God.
meant they could not be lockpicked. And the only way they could be removed was by 2 metalwork specialists who would come once every few weeks to remove them in an arduous 2-hour process. It was at this point, and only this point, that he could even take a bath. And he certainly needed one, as weeks of being shackled up with no movement meant his cuff wounds were infested with maggots. On top of that, and as cold as it had already been, it wasn't even peak winter yet. Any strength he would have left would surely be nullified by the upcoming freeze. Guards would slide his meal through, and while he struggled to eat his food off the floor, he always made sure to save a little bit of the miso soup in the corner. You see, every night he would hobble awkwardly to the inspection window.
Would he pour the... I would say pour it on your chains. No, because then your flesh wounds would get infected and you'll die.
And splash a little of it on the steel frame. He would also dab some on his handcuffs and leg cuffs. Now, his intention was for the salt content of the miso soup to oxidize the screws and bolts, eventually corroding and loosening it. After a month, this technique of rusting through the iron actually worked, and the first screw came out. The next few months saw screws and bolts coming loose, assisted by the use of the first screw as a sort of screwdriver. By the end of spring, he was able to fully remove his handcuffs and leg cuffs, as well as the steel frame of the inspection window. But there was a problem. The size of the opening was smaller than his body, which meant he couldn't fit through, a contingency thought out by the guards.
Yeah, you can still bully that feature
ability,
and do what I said.
Which involved being able to dislocate his joints at will. With this, he was now able to slide through the opening like a caterpillar. This repertoire of skills, thus surely making him an honorary member of the X-Men. With that, he climbed through a broken window in the roof and vanished.
How do you dislocate your joints?
Shiratori had now escaped from 3 prisons, as well as being the only man to ever escape Abashiri prison. Now, good on him for escaping, but
yeah, wilderness. That's why I said
this was northern Hokkaido, and the only direction he could have gone to was the cold, snowy mountains.
This is Glowforge, and it can be yours. See more at glowforge.com.
Actually, the prison guards felt that they had the last laugh, because if the cold didn't get him, the mountain bears certainly would. Despite this likelihood, there was one person who stayed hopeful, and that was Shiratori's wife. But she was still worried, because even if he was alive, she knew he wouldn't be able to make it back to his family as the...
Unlikely bears would. Hold on. How many people die to bears in Japan a year? Yeah, so basically, nobody, 5 people die a year from, a year, in today's time, 5 people die a year in Japan from bears. Unlikely he's gonna die to bears.
The authorities would be constantly on his tail, which is why she was desperately and secretly hoping that Japan would lose the war, as that would enable the US to take over the country, meaning everyone would likely forget about her husband. Of course, she kept this to herself, but then a year later, in August 1945, she got her wish.
Did they live in Nagasaki or Hiroshima?
The Americans had now taken over the country.
Please tell me they didn't live. Please tell me they did not live in Hiroshima or Nagasaki. Because if they did, that just ruined my day.
Country's penitentiary system, and sweeping changes were being made. And it did seem, perhaps, that the manhunt for Yoshie Shiratori had now taken a back seat. Yet the question remained, where was he? And was he even alive? The answer was yes, he was alive, and living a solitary life. This time, self-imposed. It turned out he had discovered an abandoned mine on a mountainside in the Hokkaido wilderness, and was able to make a home for himself. For food, he lived off nuts and berries, wild rabbits and raccoons, and was even able to learn to catch crabs from a stream by observing the habits of bears. Life was steady and safe, but after a while, curiosity got the better of him, and so after 2 years of isolation, he made his way down the mountain to a nearby village. What he saw astounded him. The streets were filled with signs written in English. The posters and flags emblematic of the war effort had vanished. And even more strange, young Japanese girls were holding hands with American soldiers. What on earth was going on? He grabbed a newspaper that had been set aside, flipped through the pages, and it was only then that he found out about the atomic bombs, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Japan had surrendered the previous year, and he couldn't believe it. As with his wife, he felt it was now pointless to hide, and so bid farewell to his old...
I was gonna say, as soon as he said pointless, I was like, they godforsaken died. As soon as he said pointless, I was gonna say they godforsaken died.
hunter-gatherer lifestyle. He headed south of Abashiri for the next 50 days, until he reached the city of Sapporo. At this point, he was starving, so he found himself a nice ripe tomato from a nearby field.
You suck, it's tomato!
Which was a huge mistake. A farmer had spotted him and mistook him for a well-known local thief, which led to a scuffle, resulting in the farmer's abdomen being pierced by a blade. Sadly, he bled out and died, but not before Shiratori was arrested for the crime. It wasn't long.
Oh, you piece of dog crap. I'm back. That's painful. That's painful. This sucks. This whole thing.
Long until police found out
He didn't. Why would you just not recognize by the face it wasn't the guy that stole your stupid crops?
that they in fact had the infamous Yoshie Shiratori in their custody. For his multiple escapes and having now murdered the farmer, despite his claims of self-defense, he was sentenced to death.
I'm back. Okay. I'm back. That's depressing.
By the district court of Sapporo. And in 1947, he was sent to Sapporo prison to await execution. Now, to ensure he wouldn't escape this time while on death row, he was placed under 24-hour surveillance, with 6 armed guards personally assigned to his watch. As for the cell itself, it was upgraded further from the one in Abashiri prison, with reinforced doors, ceilings, bars, windows. In fact, any openings were made smaller than the size of his head, not just his body, learning from the Abashiri escape, as while he may be able to dislocate his joints, he certainly can't dislocate his skull. As long as his head can't fit, they were good. The 6 guards were so confident, in fact, that they didn't even bother cuffing him.
Okay, at
Now,
least
Shiratori
that's
was
good.
getting
He has a
old,
chance.
and the odds of escaping by this point were looking slim. As his execution loomed near, there was little he could really do, and the guards knew that. They could see the desperation on his face, looking up, searching for an escape plan that they knew would never come. Though still, just in case, they made sure to search his room every night while he was taking a bath in the bathhouse, inspecting the ceiling, skylight, and any other openings. A month passed, and winter was now coming, weakening him further, and the realization was starting to dawn on him. He grew increasingly despondent, staying in bed, refusing to wake up, despite the orders of the guards. This went on for a while until one morning the guards had enough and entered the cell to discipline him. They flipped over the duvet and he was gone. This was not possible. How did he do it this time? Going back to when he was first placed under 24-hour surveillance with the 6 armed guards personally assigned to his watch. He had in fact conditioned them to look up and keep up from the very start. Not just because his previous escape attempts involved climbing through skylight windows on ceilings, but also his suspicious yet, as it turned out, very intentional behavior of constantly looking up to figure out an escape plan. Little did they know, it was all an act, and that he already had one, but it would be taking place precisely where they weren't looking. You see, it turned out the authorities were so concerned with him escaping through a window or skylight that they neglected to reinforce the bottom. This ironically ended up being his easiest and simplest escape, because all he had to do was remove the bolted floorboards, which wasn't easy, but he had experience, and using random cutlery and a miso soup bowl, dig his way to
Why is it
freedom.
always miso
This took
soup?
over a
Like, what
month,
the hell is
and
wrong
he was
with that?
able to hide his activities due to A, the guards not suspecting this approach, and B, the floorboard panels being put back in place every night after digging. The 6 guards thought they were keeping a good eye on him even at night, but with the hole consistently positioned underneath the futon and duvet, and it increasingly becoming the norm to refuse the orders of the guards to wake up, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Placing a pile of loose floorboards underneath the duvet to trick them was also a callback to his first prison escape in Aomori. So he had now escaped from prison 4 times, and by this point, the story is starting to get ridiculous. But this perpetual cycle of capture and escape was about to end, because a year later, in 1948, Shiratori was exhausted. He was in his 40s now, and this was a young man's game. One day, in the Kotoni neighborhood, still in Sapporo, as he stopped to rest, a policeman just happened to sit by his side.
Okay. So at this point, you've escaped from some of the highest security prisons in Japan. I would turn myself in. But listen to me. I would turn myself in and ask to be an inspector for the prison people. You're a criminal. You can still work a job though. What I would suggest to do is to, considering this is probably like the best person in the world at escaping prisons, I would ask to be an inspector, and he would be able to work that job until he could not be an inspector anymore. And if he had probably worked his life sentence, he would have probably have done it and made some cash along the way. And yeah, like I would consider that a nice
For a
place.
smoke. He didn't know who Shiratori was, but he struck up a conversation with him. Shiratori, of course, was wary of his presence and tried to play it cool, all the while attempting to figure out a way to remove himself from the situation without being suspicious. Suddenly, the policeman did something unexpected, at least to him. He pulled out another cigarette and offered it to him. Shiratori was stunned. You see, cigarettes were expensive luxury items in Japan at the time, and the fact that someone offered it to him just out of the kindness of his heart brought tears to his eyes. Couldn't have broke him. Of course, he was arrested to a Tokyo prison, where the weather was warmer. He was getting what he wanted. In Tokyo, he was sent to Fuchu prison, where, for the first time, the guards actually treated him well. It was a weird feeling. There were all these precautions and security measures in place to ensure that the infamous prison break magician wouldn't escape. But the truth was, Shiratori didn't really care anymore. Everything he'd been...
Okay, yeah, at this point, I would have basically done what Yoshi did. I would have basically done the exact same thing. I would have basically done what he did. Yeah, I would have basically done what he did. Exactly what he did, in fact. Because that is what he wanted. And I would still try to escape if the guards were like rough or like in other prisons. But if they were not mean at all and they were kind of like nice and they did not beat you, I would have stayed there and waited out my sentence. Probably. Yeah, I would have probably waited out my sentence. Because, yeah, it would have just been, yeah, just do nothing, chill in prison. Yeah, probably do what he did.
Been fighting against the mistreatment from guards, the death penalty, even the northern climate was no longer of concern, and he was at peace. There was no need to escape anymore. He finally accepted his punishment, and for the remainder of his sentence, acted as a model prisoner. Just 14 years later, in 1961, he was released on parole, and for the first time in a long time, he was truly a free man. He decided to head back to Almaty, where it all began, and meet up with his daughter.
Guys, hello, welcome back. I did not say this at the beginning, but I do have a 90K special video coming in. It is a montage, and I can't tell you what it is because I'm still working on it, but I'm just going to say I've been grinding Valorant. Not unranked, a different game mode. And remember guys, like and subscribe, little benefit when I upload a video, and I had no clue what this video was, and Jailbreaker out.